Welcome to the podcast, The Connected Journey, Life with IC, where in each episode I talk to a person living with interstitial cystitis and take some time to explore one piece of their story and their journey with IC. This is your host, Laura Santuri, and I'm glad you're here. All right, Maya Van Wagenen, welcome to The Connected Journey, Life with IC. We're glad you're here. So to get started, we're going to jump right in with our first question. If you could take some time to introduce yourself, and as you do that, could you tell us a little bit about the moment that you first found out that you had IC?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Maya Van Wagenen. I am an author. And I found out that I had IC when I was 15 years old. I had been going to doctors up until that point, and there'd been this recurring pattern of every time I gave a urine sample, they noticed blood. And so they were just like, oh, it's a UTI. We're going to put you on some antibiotics and do a culture. And the culture would always come back negative. And we did this like 3 or 4 times over the course of a year. And finally, my pediatrician was like, we should maybe get you looked at by a urologist. And there wasn't a lot of like choices for who to see. We were in a small town and not everyone wanted to do like pediatric urology. And so we found someone I could go to, and they did a hydrodilation and cystoscopy. And I remember going back after that to like get the results, and I was with my mom and she was so nervous. And I remember that he was kind of sitting on a rolly stool, and he never got up from it. He was just kind of rolling around the office, telling me this news. And he was like, oh, you have something called interstitial cystitis. There's no cure for it. There are some treatments, but we're not going to pursue those right now because you're, so young. But here's this like stack of papers about a low acid diet. So go do that. And, there are things that could make it worse. And he was like, spicy foods or alcohol or like, and I remember that he like lowered his voice and he went, or like your ladies' days. And it was so surreal to me that he wouldn't say period.
He actually said ladies' days.
And it was so surreal. And at that point, I was 15, right? And he was the first person since diapers to like look at my genitals, and he can't even say period.
Or the actual term, right?
Yes. And I was just horrified. And he was like, we don't need to make a follow-up appointment. You're going to learn how to manage this on your own. It's lifelong, but you'll be fine. And I remember leaving that appointment, and my mom was just so relieved. And she said, I was so worried it was something serious. And at that point, like I didn't have a whole lot of information about what was going on in my body. But I sort of had like this sense that it might actually be kind of serious.
Yeah.
But I think what, it was framed against was, was this going to be a life-threatening condition? And it's not a life-threatening condition. And so it was framed as like easy breezy, you're going to manage this just fine on your own. So that was the moment I found out.
Nothing like having someone rolling around on a little rolly stool to tell you that you have this lifelong condition, but here's a stack of papers and essentially good luck.
Yep.
How were you feeling when you left that office?
I was so confused. And I like launched into some research. And I was very nervous about what I was reading because it didn't seem to like be completely in line with what he'd, said about this, like not being a big deal. And at that point I was like, oh my gosh, is this why like I'm in pain all the time? Like, is this what's causing the discomfort? And so like I committed like really, really strictly to the icy diet for years. And that was like the only like resource that I had tangibly to like try and make it better. Um, but yeah, it's still such a vivid memory.
I can only imagine. So I know that writing has been a really important part of your journey living with IC. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about writing about and living with the condition. As we jump into those questions, could you introduce your award-winning book?
Yes, absolutely. So my second book and first novel is called Chronically Dolores. And it follows a recently turned 14-year-old the summer before she goes to high school. And she's been diagnosed with interstitial cystitis several months earlier, something that she hasn't told her friends or anyone at school, but something that her family is aware of. Um, and her standoff with her Judas bladder, as she calls it, leads to an incredibly embarrassing incident during the last week of middle school. Um, and it's so publicly mortifying that her childhood best friend reaches out and says, you know what, maybe we should like take some distance because I need like a clean start when I go to high school and I want to be able to be in with like a cool group of people, and you're kind of a mess right now, which is not what she wants to hear. And so she decides that she's going to prove to her friend that she is still, you know, socially acceptable and that she can be part of a cool group of people. And she does this through forming a kind of alliance with a homeschool girl who is starting high school in the fall as well, um, who is very pretty and has impeccable style. And so it's kind of like the outsider coming in, so the other girls are like, oh, she's so cool. And she is autistic, and so her mother has kept her home from school, but she really wants to go to public school. And so they both kind of decide to help each other um, prove to their respective people that they are competent and thriving, and can get through this next chapter.
Excellent. Thank you for the synopsis. So you mentioned that this is your second book.
It
So one of my
is.
first questions for you is, how did you first begin writing about IC? Sounds like writing was something you were already doing, but did the diagnosis inspire you in any way?
So I always knew that I was going to write about interstitial cystitis. My first book, which I wrote before my diagnosis, was a memoir journal where I did a social experiment during my last year of middle school, and wrote about the results of that. And so during that period of my life, I really learned how empowering it could be to take the really difficult, frustrating moments in that I was experiencing and to rewrite them as story. And it was then that I started looking at these things that would happen, and be like, oh, this is so awful to be living in the moment, but it's going to be really funny when I write it out later. um,
Right.
and I sort of took that like knowledge with me into high school and into this diagnosis. And so I started keeping a list on my phone of all of the really weird, funny, surreal, horrifying moments that were happening to me because of interstitial cystitis. And there was a lot of just like absurdist humor in the weird situations that I would find myself in, or the advice that people would give me. And it was also a place where I could write out, the embarrassing and the really tragic things. And so I kept that in my notes folder for years, and I kept adding to it as I got older and was in my 20s. And by that point, interstitial cystitis was playing a profound role in my life, socially, romantically, um, in my employment, in my education. And so I always figured that when I wrote about interstitial cystitis, it was going to be about an adult experiencing the condition, because there are a lot of elements that impact adults in ways that they don't necessarily impact kids. Um, so I kind of blocked a lot of like the IC stuff from high school, but I was working on this book, and I had this phenomenal cast of characters, and I loved them. And I was working with my agent, and he loved them, and he's like, "We just haven't found the right story for them." And I thought about it for a second, and I was like, "Well, what if we gave Dolores the same chronic condition that I got diagnosed with when I was in high school?" Um, and everything just kind of clicked together. It was the right story for these characters. Um, and it sort of inspired me to look back at things that I had forgotten about being that age and being chronically ill, and all of the like feelings and fears about how that was going to impact me later on. Um, so it was hugely cathartic to be writing about.
Yeah, as someone who also had symptoms start when she was a young adult, I was 14 years old. I can distinctly remember some of the more absurd slash horrifying moments.
Mhm.
And I think it's really great that for you in those moments, you recognize them as such and were able to document them. I think that's really fantastic. So it sounds like you were already writing a fiction book and then kind of came to this conclusion that why don't we make it about this?
Mhm.
Um, how did the people around you react to that idea?
There was a lot of pushback at first. The initial fear was that a book about, 14-year-old experiencing a incurable chronic disease, that involves bodily functions would be depressing and gross. Um, and I was in a position where I kind of had to reassure my publisher and the people in the room that, like, yeah, sometimes it is kind of depressing and gross.
Yeah.
But I promise you this book is going to be really, really funny. Um, and they were like, "Well, if you can do that, we'll we'll let you we'll let you try. We'll let you give it a shot." And that was all I needed. And in a lot of ways, having them challenge it made me that much more adamant that this is the story that I wanted to tell. Just kind of seeing their reaction of like, I don't know if this is the direction we want to take. Suddenly I was like, well, this is the direction I'm going to take. Like, this is what we're doing. Um, and that was when I realized the underrepresentation of chronic illness in young adult literature. And on the shelves, there were dozens and dozens of books about life threatening illnesses and diseases. And I knew very, very, very few people in high school who'd ever gotten a diagnosis like that. But there were dozens of these books. But there were no books about someone being diagnosed with a chronic illness that deeply impacted their life and was never going to get better, but wasn't going to kill them. And I knew so many people who had to deal with those diagnoses in high school or in middle school. And all of these people were suffering silently around me, and there was just no language and no representation about how to even talk about these things, because with chronic illness, the sort of the pressure is you deal with this on your own and don't make it a problem for anybody else. And like, you need to learn how to handle this. And it's exactly, what that urologist told me was like, this is on you to figure out how to,
Here's a stack of
yeah,
papers.
here's
Have
a stack
fun.
of papers. Don't inconvenience anyone else. And I think in high school, all of us who had those conditions were trying so hard not to inconvenience anyone else and not to let anyone know that we were struggling or suffering. And we didn't have any books that facilitated conversations about that.
Right. Yeah, being young is hard enough on its own. To be dealing with a condition that also can bring such stigma and shame based on its nature, it makes it even more challenging. So tell me a little bit about Dolores, because I'm curious about if there are any experiences that you articulate in the book that reflect some of your own experiences as a young adult.
Yeah, so quite a few of Dolores's experiences come from my own memories. For example, she also has sort of a word for word diagnosis story. And the way that Dolores's mind works is she tends to embellish her memories and add some.
Don't we all just a little bit?
Yes, exactly. And she tends to add some theatrics to it. So it's sort of a little bit telenovela. There's violins sometimes and fans and smoke. But the dialogue is word for word my dialogue that I experienced up until the point where her urologist rolls down the hallway on his chair, skittering away from her, as she's screaming after him to just say period.
Such a
But
great image.
yeah, so that definitely came from lived experience. A lot of how Dolores's family interacts with her condition comes from how my family interacted with my condition. And I love my family, and my family loves me, but they had no idea how to support or talk about or ask questions about this condition. And the urologist had framed it in such a way as like, this was my responsibility now, um to figure out how to live a normal life, and like I said, not inconvenience anyone else, not to ask
Right.
for help. And I think that really framed how my parents looked at this condition. And neither one of them had any chronic illnesses. I mean, my dad had asthma, but asthma could be life-threatening, and so that was very serious and something to take very seriously. And this, was sort of just a nebulous blob of pain and inconvenience in my body, that had no outward signs. And my family didn't always know how to support me. And there were times when it felt like I just wanted to be able to explain to them, like, this is what it's like this is
Right.
what I'm feeling. Um, but at that point it was, too raw.
Hmm.
And Dolores has an aunt who's like trying to faith heal her
There's
affliction,
always
calls
one.
it. Yes. And so she's got the oils and the prayers and the saints, and that's, the one person it sort of feels like in Dolores's family who's taking her condition seriously.
Sure.
Um, but it's not super helpful to Dolores in the way that she's showing up for her. And it was really, incredible to kind of write this family. I love writing families, to write this family dynamic. And, it's not that Dolores's family doesn't love her. They just have a lot of other stuff going on and they don't understand what's happening. Um, and they haven't taken the time to ask. And there's one moment um, that I write about where her older brother kind of looks at her and he's like, it hurts, doesn't it? Like it hurts. And she's like, yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
And to just kind of have some dialogue on that. So a lot of that came from experiences. The descriptions of the pain, the things that cause her flare-ups are similar to the things that cause my flare-ups and things like that.
I can imagine that for people listening, this resonates because even for adults, thinking about the relationships we have in our lives, especially with partners or
Mhm.
spouses, it doesn't mean they don't love us, but understanding exactly how we're feeling can be really challenging. And I know for me personally, being able to articulate what it feels like is not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty significant experience for most of us living with this
Mhm.
condition. So, but even more challenging when you're a young adult too.
Yeah.
So, because we don't always have the best communication skills when we're young, or honestly, when we're adults too. That to be
Yeah,
fair.
it's hard for sure.
Um, so tell me about how writing this book may have changed your journey living with IC. Did it have you thinking about things differently?
It did. A lot of Dolores's realizations and her arc with IC is what I was telling myself and like what I needed to hear. Um, at that point in my life, I had dropped out of school twice because of this condition. Um, I struggled to work jobs in retail and things like that, and was just really, IC was so present in all of these aspects of my life. And um, having that pain experience while I was writing about the pain experience. And for Dolores, her relationship to IC is such a big part of the book. And I knew that that was, in a lot of ways, one of the major conflicts of the book. So I knew there needed to be a resolution at the end of it for that conflict. Um, but I didn't want to like take an easy, what I felt like would have been like the easy way out is, she goes into remission and like
Right,
things stop hurting, and like, well, remission does happen and it's amazing. Not everybody gets that.
right.
And at that point, I was very much not in remission. And so a lot of the questions that I was asking myself about my values and what I wanted out of life and how could I hold this condition while also, you know, while not fighting it, because that was such a, like, it shouldn't be like this. Like, I shouldn't be hurting. I shouldn't be doing this. I want to be doing, I want to not be hurting. And so like I'll save these things that I want to do for when I get better, right? That's such a a common feeling, like someday I'll be able to do these things and I'll feel better and all of this. And I started to ask myself, and Dolores has people in her life ask her, what if you don't get better? What do you do then? And what do you do with that life you have? Um, and for Dolores, it's, still going after the things that she loves. It's um, building relationships and community, and it looks different, and like IC is still a part of that. Um, but it's this belief that like this is a life worth living and like worth enjoying, and really embracing to the extent that that you want to. And that was all things that like I needed to hear in
Yeah.
the throes of this like ongoing flare, was like, maybe the condition won't change, but you'll change,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you'll build skills, and you will find ways to handle it. And also, part of that for Dolores is starting to rely on other people and communicate her needs. And she has um a friend now who understands and sees her and is willing to learn about interstitial cystitis and things like that. And um yeah, so that was very much how like I felt I needed to work through it at the time. Um and like it's an ongoing thing, unlike a book where it has that
Right.
nice little ending.
Yep.
It's an everyday sort of
Hmm.
thing. Like this everyday kind of choice of like there are still things I want to do, and like still people I love and places I want to show up, and how do I do that and still like feel okay about things, and like I'm allowed to be hurting and also happy and excited and doing things, and like that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes me think about, I think for a lot of us, we grapple with this. How do we allow this condition to become a part of our identity, because it is and will remain so
Hmm.
until we get that magic cure, right?
Yeah.
So how do we grapple with allowing it to become part of our identity, but not allowing it to overly shape our lives? It's going
Yeah.
to affect us. We can't stop that. But it makes me think about even the language we use around. I try really hard not to say IC patient, but
Mm.
I rather to say I'm a person with IC. I'm a
Yeah.
person first. And I just happen to have this chronic condition that affects certain things about my life, but it doesn't shape everything. And it sounds like
Yeah.
writing this book helped you think through some of that kind of balancing act there.
Yes, absolutely. And especially since it was part of my life, like you, from such a young age.
Yeah.
Um, when
You
you're
don't get an
really building
opportunity
that
to
identity. Yeah.
yeah, you don't get an opportunity to be someone without this condition, really. Like
Yes. Yeah.
I'm most of my memories, I imagine it's similar for you. Most of my memories of young adulthood, this condition is ever present.
Hmm. Yeah. There were moments where I would, just as a teenager, be scared at the idea of like, what if I never get to have a normal young adulthood, or like a normal adulthood, and like what if the
Yeah.
things that other people get to do I just don't get to do? But they weren't like directly impacting me at that moment, so it's like, you know the sort of nebulous fear of like someday I want to drink alcohol and have sex. Like I'm not
Yeah.
doing that at 15,
Right.
but what if I can never do that? Like what is that, like, that fear of what if Yeah, exactly. What if?
Yep.
Um, because you just don't know. And that being able to write through that a little bit with Dolores, because she does kind of exist in this nebulous space of not knowing exactly how this is going to impact her in the future, but also dealing with how it impacts her present.
Yep.
Um, and it was very interesting to kind of be an older person with IC, kind of in dialogue with like a little person with IC, like,
Yeah.
baby Maya is on the page in a lot of ways, being like, I don't know that I'm ever going to figure this out. And, you know, being a decade wiser and further into the condition, it was like, it's not as like straightforward as that, but like it's still gonna be okay, and you're still gonna be you, and you know you will find ways to make your life work and make it meaningful.
Yeah. So it sounds like a little bit like a conversation with your younger self as you wrote this
Yeah.
book. I like that. So, how do you hope, or how have you seen this book help other people understand IC or chronic illness, especially chronic illness that involves chronic pain?
Hmm. So that was so important to me when I wrote this book. And I had a reader early on, before, someone I sent it to before publication to get their notes on, who also had interstitial cystitis. Um, and I was like, I'm only one person writing from one person's experience. But I want to make sure that it feels like emotionally true, and that it resonates. And so she wrote back and she was like, I have never read a book that I felt so seen. She's like, I want to give it to everyone I
Oh,
know,
wow.
and just be like, this is what it's like. And that was such a powerful moment for me. Um, Not just like as a writer and like feeling good about it, but also really realizing that this wasn't something that was individual to me, and that there was a whole community of people who were living this experience too. And that I was a part of that, but I'd never opened up about that pain, because that's scary, and you don't want to, look like you're complaining, or all of that. So I'd
Well, again,
never.
you don't want to be
Yeah,
inconvenient to
you don't
people,
want to be
right?
inconvenient. So I'd never like talked about it. And so actually writing on the page, um, the way that Dolores is experiencing the pain in her body and the frustration and all of that, and having that resonate with other people with IC, um, meant so much to me. And I've heard from a few other people as well. Um, and both with IC, and then also just with, like you said, chronic pain conditions. Um, because it's so not talked about. Um, and there was a librarian who I met at a book signing who said that her high school used this book for a book club. And that just made me so happy, um, because it opens a dialogue to talk about some of these conditions, and to for people who have chronic pain to feel validated in that way that I did when I heard other people being like, yeah, this is how we roll, this is how it goes. And you know for people to feel that way, but also for people who don't have chronic pain
Hmm.
to sort of take a second and peer into it, um and live that experience for a little while, and to see who are the people in Dolores's life who are being really helpful, and
Right?
like what are the really unhelpful
Yeah.
things that Dolores is family or friends are doing or saying. What, so building that like empathy, and a space to talk about it, and being able to talk about these characters is sometimes easier than talking about, you know, yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's why I picked fiction, for sure, because it's easier. Um, and in a lot of ways allowed me to be more honest. And, I was really excited to hear that that librarian had brought that book into a space where it could really be discussed.
Yeah, and not only to help others feel more validated or less alone, but just in general, the work that you're doing through your book to raise awareness of the condition. I would be willing to bet that there is at least one young adult out there who has picked up your book and looked at how she's described her symptoms and said, "Oh my gosh, I wonder if that's what I have."
Mhm.
I think back about, my experience when I was 14 or 15, because it took me 3 years to get diagnosed. I was 18. I would have loved to have had the opportunity to pick up a book like this and not only see myself, but maybe have a name for what I had. So I
Yeah.
think raising awareness in general, you are absolutely being an advocate through this book as well.
Yeah.
So, for other people who might want to try out writing, to maybe they've heard you talk about how it's helped you process your journey and they're thinking about maybe wanting to experience the same thing. Do you have any tips or advice for someone who wants to get started but doesn't know how?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, there is so much advice out there for how to, you know, be a writer, how to build a writing practice. And I think a lot of it is geared towards healthy people with bodies that feel good all the time and work.
Indeed.
Um, and, you'll hear things like, oh, you need a dedicated writing space, like you need a desk and a hard chair so you're gonna focus. And um,
That sounds painful.
yeah, exactly. Or you need to be able to like write for 4 hours straight, and you just do that every morning. And um, so there's a lot of stuff like that, which when that sounds miserable, is very like off-putting, and you're like, oh, is that what it takes to write about things or to write in general? Like that seems super um, exclusive. But
Indeed. Yeah.
yeah, but the reality is that there have been people, authors with chronic illness and disability forever, and they've been making it work. And this idea of like the the perfect way to write or building the perfect writing practice um was not helpful for me. And the vast majority of Chronically Dolores I wrote in bed. And anything that I didn't write in bed on my laptop, I wrote on the couch. And I was there, because it was comfortable. And like I wrote in shorter stints than the long stretches that sometimes people make you feel like you have to do to be a writer. I'd write for 30 minutes here and there, or do a couple short little sessions throughout the day. Um, and I really found it powerful to be like working in metaphor a little bit, writing about what I was experiencing, um, because you can't give someone your body and be like, this is how it feels. Um, so you use like these abstract terms, um, and you build the experience through metaphor, and writing those out was something that was so powerful and necessary for me to be like, my pain feels like. Um, and, some of the ones that Dolores uses that I still think about are like a butterfly in a display case, and like she's been stabbed through the center of her body. Um, or how there's just a pain that she can't quite reach, and it feels like a really sore muscle that if she could just take her body apart and like be able to touch and like release, and all of these descriptors um gave me a lot more like power and comfort than like ouch it hurts, which is also valid. um
Sure.
but building like language and metaphor around it um let me share that experience with other people in a way that they could kind of conceptualize, um and in a way that really like, even though it's metaphor,
Mhm.
it became more grounded and real for other people reading about it, instead of being like, my bladder hurts.
Yeah,
um
what does that mean,
yeah,
right?
exactly. It's like most people don't even feel their bladder unless they
Right.
really have to pee. Wild, but
I
I'm
can't
like,
imagine.
I know where it is all the time. But yeah, so I really found that helpful. um it was helpful to share it with other people who'd experienced IC, so building that kind of community, but also other people who hadn't.
Mhm.
um and it was incredible to be able to share some of my experiences with my family, um and you know be able to be like, yeah, this is how it goes, this is what I'm going through, and some of the like emotions around it too that were sometimes like difficult to talk about verbally.
Mhm.
And so writing kind of made that, it gave me the time and space to process that. So I think, my advice being like, in the very practical realm, do it in a way that's comfortable and engage in your writing in a way that's comfortable. Um, and then in more of like the creative sense, really kind of experimenting in those metaphors, and then building that community of people who can read and give you feedback.
I think that's great advice, and I appreciate you helping it feel a little more attainable for people who can't necessarily follow that advice that you do see quite a bit.
Yes.
We talk about it even in academia, right? So as a faculty member, you're really pushed to get out publications, and they always tell
Mm.
you, carve out like 3 hours in the morning and just get your butt in the seat essentially and
Yes,
stay there. And like, well, some of us can't do that. Or for some of us, that's very uncomfortable. So
exactly.
um, I appreciate you helping us realize that it is attainable even if you can't do those things.
For sure.
So are you working on any new projects that we should know about?
I am transitioning now into adult fiction, um, which I am excited about. The project I'm working on now does not deal with chronic illness. However, I do really want my grown-up IC story. I do really want to write about those more adult experiences and the adult impacts. Um, and so I know that that's going to happen at some point, and I continue to keep my notes, um, and add to them over time. And so that's definitely something that I do want to write about in the near future. And I think being, a person with chronic illness and multiple chronic illnesses, there's always that factor of, that is how I experience the world. And I don't really remember experiencing the world differently than that. So on some level, I wonder if, everything I write is a little bit shaped by the
Inevitably.
way, yeah, that lens.
Yeah.
Um,
So, how can listeners connect with you and where can they find Chronically Dolores?
well, you can connect with me on Instagram, Maya Van Wagenen, or email Maya Van Wagenen author at gmail.com. Um, and you can find Chronically Dolores. You can order it through any bookstore or through Amazon or through Penguin. We have the paperback out, which has the fun little, yes,
Showing
the
it for those
Schneider
watching on
Family
YouTube.
Award stamp, which I am very, very proud of to have I always wanted that stamp on a book someday. Like I wanted a medal or something like that. That was very, as a little kid in the library, I was like, oh, I want something like that on my book someday. So the Schneider Family Award for Disability Representation in Young Adult Literature. So I'm very, very proud of that.
Yeah, congratulations on that. That's a big
Thank
deal.
you. And we love to see an acknowledgement of interstitial cystitis as a disability. Um,
Wouldn't that make sense?
yes.
Yes.
So I think that was, incredibly validating for me too, to be like, yeah, this is a condition that is a disability,
Right.
and it has that level of impact on someone's life. Um, and to be the first, you know, interstitial cystitis writer, um,
Hmm.
to write about it. And I do think that it's, just a first. I think that
Yeah.
there will be others, and that's really exciting to me. Because it's, that representation matters so much. And I'm, like I said, one person with one experience. Um, but there are so many others with so many other things to say and other ways that they've processed the condition. And so I'm really excited to see in coming years more chronic pain representation, and hopefully more IC representation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the bravery to open the door for the rest of us.
Well, thank you.
So, as I ask all guests at the end, what would you say to someone newly diagnosed with IC, someone who might be struggling to find their own voice and their path in this journey?
Oh, well, it is intimidating at first. There's a lot of information, and it can be tempting to get really sucked in to all of the scary, scary statistics, and um, especially because that's kind of how we process information now. We go and we research. Um, and I remember that experience and just being so hopeless of like, what is my life going to be like? I think I would, say, just like you said, that you are a person first and your dreams and ambitions are the same as they were before getting diagnosed. And, you know, you will have to learn how to listen to your body, which is a lifelong thing. And that can teach you a lot of patience and a lot of intuitiveness and reflection, and you can grow from those experiences, and they can also connect you to other people. um, and there are ways to find humor and joy and love in all parts of this condition. And I one of the things that happens now with my IC journey is I get up a bunch of times in the night to pee, right? I think that's a pretty common experience.
Yep.
But every single time I get up to pee, my cat is so excited and he is so ready to escort me to the bathroom
Oh,
every
bless
single
him.
time. And he just like, stands at my feet and curls his tail around and, demands the head scratches, then walks me right back to bed. And it's such a funny little moment that I wouldn't have if I didn't have IC. And he doesn't see this as a problem. He's just thrilled that we have our little ritual. And it's those kinds of things where it's like, yeah, it's going to be okay. Like you find the joy and the relationships and the meaning and the humor in all of it.
I absolutely love that. And, I never thought about it this way, but I also get up pretty regularly overnight to pee. And every time I do, my dogs get excited about the idea that they might be getting breakfast really soon because I'm getting up. And so they wake up. They don't escort me to the bathroom, but they're waiting for me when I come back. And when I come back to bed, I always get like this extra little moment of like petting one of them or cuddling with one of them. And I love it because you know what? That's extra time I get with them. It's a gift that I wouldn't have otherwise. So I absolutely love your approach to thinking about finding those little moments of beauty, even in the challenging moments. And I just so appreciate you connecting us with joy and humor.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you.
thank you, Maya, for sharing your time and your story with us. We are very grateful.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Connected Journey, Life with IC, where we work to defeat isolation one story at a time. Until our next episode, should you find yourself in need of resources, I encourage you to connect with the ICA at ichelp.org. Thanks all, and take good care.